And now for something completely different. She is curator and project manager at Cairns Marine Australia since 2010, officially their first and so best import. Before that, she was in the public aquarium industry in the US, in places like SeaWorld or Orlando. She loves indie rocks, she prefers live music, and above all, she's a circus freak, performing her aerial on silk. Please welcome Miss L Simmons.
Well, thank you very much for that. I suppose I should say that, yeah, after you know my dirty little secret, it's easy for me to ask you who's touched your snapper. But actually today, it's not really something completely different. It's quite fortuitous that I'm speaking right after Chris, because today I'll be talking to you a little bit about how a sustainable supply chain can help ensure success. And just to go back a little bit, again, I have been in the public aquarium industry for 23 years. For those of you that don't know me, I was at SeaWorld of Florida for 16 years, and after that I worked for Landry's Corporation, opening aquariums and curating facilities. So I'm a very proud member of your community, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. So I'll get started. Around the world, we're all very lucky. We have some pretty amazing facilities that are being opened everywhere. There are beautiful aquariums of every size and shape with different themes, a wide variety of animals that are being exhibited. There are a few things that we all have in common, though, regardless of the size or the theming of our habitats, and that is that we all have fishes, and they've all come from somewhere. And more importantly, we're exhibiting these animals in an effort to inspire people to conserve the environment, to learn about these creatures, and hopefully to be able to educate the wider community about how incredible all of these animals are. But as I said, all of these animals come from somewhere. Not all aquaria have the luxury of collecting their own animal specimens. Not everyone can get animals that have been aquacultured. In fact, it's desirable to have animals coming from the wild environment. And when they do come from the wild environment, they are coming from somewhere in the world. And so here you see, the problem though is that even though they're coming from somewhere, they don't have little tags that come with them. As consumers, we're normally accustomed to having information labels or stickers or something that tells us about quality control and about where our animals are from or where our products are coming from. But with our animals, we don't always have that luxury. We should. The animals are collected by a human being. They're not collected by machines. They're not processed in a factory. They're actually being gathered by someone, somewhere in the world. They're being transported to another station or sometimes even directly to us. So as the end user, we have to remember that we need to start learning a little bit more about where our animals are coming from. You may be asking, though, why does it really matter? I think Chris's talk explains it pretty well, that you really need to know. My personal opinion is that the reason it matters who's been touching our snapper has a lot of different factors. It really highlights our conservation message. The supply chain length can actually make a difference in how our animals survive and thrive over the long term. If you have your animal that's being handed down from a wide variety, from hand to hand to hand, that long chain along the way, increased mortalities can occur or some additional stressors can happen with our animals. Also our fishery types. That was one thing that Chris was highlighting very specifically. There are only a few fisheries in the world, and some of those aren't managed quite as well as others. The collection techniques used can actually change the way you need to husband your specimens. If you don't know how they've been collected and how they've been handled, how can we possibly know what they need to have happen to them on our end once they come into our quarantine facilities? The holding and post-capture husbandry is also quite important because have your animals eaten? Were they ever acclimatized to dead foods or to prepared foods? Or how do you really get to know what those animals are going to be comfortable eating? They're coming from the wild. They need to have that transition phase. Also, prophylaxis sometimes is required. Obviously, the way the animals are transported can make a massive difference on how we finally handle our animals in our displays. And then lastly, the history and the context. And that's the thing I think I want to highlight the most today, and that is because we are sending out a message. We need to walk our talk. And so I feel like if we don't know where our animals are coming from, how can we possibly give a conservation message to our guests? So, supply and handling. If you have a little daisy chain like this, you're passing animals along the line. This luckily is just buckets of water to put out a fire, or maybe not so luckily. Anyway, so there are a wide variety of supply chains, and not everybody in this room or in our industry really understands sometimes what the supply chain might look like. A direct supply chain can be very, very simple and very easy. You could actually talk to the diver that collected your animals. That's a very direct supply chain, and I would say probably the most sustainable version, which is your collector is also your supplier and the person that's handling your animals between the wild and when it comes to you at your facility. You also have the short supply chains. You may have a really reliable, trusted supplier or wholesaler that sends you your fish, and of course they have an intimate relationship with the collector or the group of collectors that are gathering your animals. And then lastly, the most common is the complex and unknown fishery model, and also having no transparency in that line. It is so important for us to be able to have that traceability. Again, transparency and traceability is our right for knowledge within the industry. So here's a little example of what you might see, two very distinct differences. I am not suggesting at all that this can't be sustainable. I'd like to point out that it could be, as long as we know that our collectors are good collectors, not using cyanide, not using destructive practices, that they're actually collecting in a very well-managed fishery. Then to village holding, onto a regional consolidator. Often what happens is a collector will collect the fishes in a small village. The village holds the fish in bags in a small hut or in a small building, and they wait for a boat to come around every 1 or 2 days. Or sometimes they go out far and wide and bring them all back to a regional consolidator. Then it goes to your wholesaler or exporter, from there to a transshipper or to another wholesaler, and then lastly to the end user, which is us. And in the tropical fishes industry, obviously, we are not the grandest consumers. We're not the ones that are consuming the most of these animals. Instead, it would be going to the hobbyist industry. But I think we need to lead the charge and lead the way by being the ones that are demonstrating the most sustainable pathway. And of course, the supply chain that I suggested. You have companies like Cairns Marine or like Dynasty Marine that you have that are your collectors. You know who's catching the fish and what boats they're using. You know where the holding facility is. You're welcome to come visit. And lastly, they're also your supplier, and they go directly to you, the end user. On the global import and export stage, I think this is a pretty important model for us to look at. As you can see, the end users are in blue. These are the highest consumers of all the tropical fishes in the world. And guess what? That's us. You also have your moderate volume exporters. This is where the fishes are being collected to go to all of us in blue. And then here is the region where most of the fishes are coming from. I believe the statistic at present is around 70 to 80% of all the fish in the world, tropical marine fishes, are coming from this region. And again, that's the coral triangle. We would need to find out what kinds of fisheries are operating in these areas. So from there, let's take a much closer look at the higher volume. As Chris mentioned, cyanide has been proven to be, say, in the Hainan Island, that would be right up there. But this model shows, or this map shows, that it has been confirmed in other locations all around the world. They just so happen to be in the hot spots. And then, of course, they're also suspected in some of these other areas. This just so happens, if you can see the distinct difference between orange and red on this map, it's a bit difficult. Those are actually just coral reef areas, highlighted in red. So unfortunately, this is the sad truth of it all, that the fisheries are not all the same. In this region, I would say, oops, sorry, let me go back. In the region here that we consider up through the Philippines and Indonesia, those are fisheries that actually do have management. Cyanide collection is illegal in those areas. The problem is it's used because they're not monitored, they're not managed. And this is where the disconnect comes. How do we really get the fisheries to be more managed? You go to another highly managed fishery like Australia, where you'd never have cyanide collection, you'd never be able to use destructive practices because there are solid networks in place, and there's a massive amount of communication between the fisheries as well as the government. It's a partnership. So moving on, to go a little bit deeper into what's important about the collection locations that we're discussing. Some of the fishery collection types you'll see here. You can either have hand collection and net collection, where there's very little damage to the environment. Soft nets are required to be used. I'll point that one out here, because this is hand net catching with no chemicals. The nets are very soft. They don't actually damage the corals in the process of collection. And notice it's one fish. It's one fish at a time. It's very purposeful collection, not just everything is being collected up in a swath. Here, though, you might find, surprisingly, this is actually where a lot of our larger animals come from. These are normally considered food fishery nets. Some people in Australia, we call these fish traps. They're not legal in Australia. But this is actually, these are from Taiwan. This photograph is from Taiwan. And they either call this a type of set net or a fish trap. Larger animals like manta rays, wouldn't be caught in this particular net, but on a much larger scale. That's where mantas or even other sharks that we have on display, when they're coming from Taiwan, this is likely the type of set net fishery or trap fishery that you'd find. Your animal may not be damaged or compromised in any way by this collection technique, but what we have to ask ourselves is, with all of the other bycatch, because this is truly a bycatch version of catching our display animals, rather than calling it incidental bycatch, we like to call it targeted bycatch for those particular sharks and rays. The problem is that you're also catching up a lot of other animals. You've seen what happens with trawlers collecting prawns and shrimps, picking up hundreds and millions of seahorses. It's a similar concept, that these food fisheries are picking up a lot of other things in their bycatch and in the wake. And then lastly, you would have the free-for-all fisheries, the snatch and grab type fishery that could have management arrangements in place but not enforced, and that would include some of the cyanide fisheries. So this photograph, I actually did want to discuss a little bit further, because at first I just wanted to say, would you rather get your fish from this type of collection or this type of collection? But really, when you look at these little, these are teeny tiny blue tangs, and that is a beautiful head of coral, an acropora. The interesting thing about this is not just that I don't know if I really want my fish shaken down onto the ground before I pick them up to have them shipped onward. What's happened is this is in the Solomon Islands. This particular collector doesn't know really what he's doing to the environment. He hasn't been educated. He doesn't really understand the collection method. But what he has figured out is that if you go to this particular species of coral, and it is a very specific species of coral that little baby blue tangs like to settle in, and they use it as their shelter when they're very tiny. Once they find this out, they break the entire coral head off, shake the animals out. That's the target species. Then this piece of coral is chucked right back out, very, kind of randomly back out into the water, and it's dead. It won't grow. It's no longer used by the fishes. They only use this living acropora for survival. And so you've gotten these animals that weren't exactly collected in a really sound way, but you've also damaged the environment quite a great deal. I can tell you from the experiences that I've discussed with people like Forrest at Dynasty or some of the divers at Cairns Marine, a lot of these animals are really, really hard to catch. That's pretty much a really easy way to catch a fish, I suppose. If you destroy its house, you can't help but catch it. So, but again, these pictures were for me to demonstrate to you, would you rather have your fish collected this way or, again, soft nets, hand collected, placed into a container, and handled properly along the way. From there, you go to your housing and water quality, and also the way your animals are husbanded or potentially prophylactically treated. This has to have a great impact on your animals. When animals are coming into a location like this, this is in the Philippines. This is the way they house the animals until they're picked up to go to their next wholesaler or into a sort of a consolidator situation. Their version of a water change is basically changing 100% of the water out each day in the bags. And of course, this does not allow them to feed the animals. Whereas in other facilities, you'd find that the animals are going into clean water, they're being collected, housed, cared for, transitioned into their own food so that they're able to go to you healthy and hopefully their gut fauna and flora hasn't been compromised from stress or any disease that they might be introduced to. Again, I'm going with this photo to show you that this is the beginning of a very long chain when they come from here. So along the way, obviously, he's not selling any of the animals that die in those bags. Only the ones that are alive get sold. So I guess this is the main thing. We need to seek the information. And not just information, but really good information. When I was a really young aquarist 20 years ago, not that young, but definitely a new aquarist, I asked my manager, I was unpacking a big load of fish that we had just gotten in, and I said, wow, this is awesome. Everybody knows the feeling. You've gotten a big shipment, a big box of a group of fishes in, and it's so exciting. It's like Christmas morning. You know, you're opening all these great boxes. It's a little stressful because you want everything to be in great shape. And so I was looking for information. I was a really curious little monkey, and I wanted to know everything I could possibly know. So I asked my curator, where did these fish come from? Tell me a little bit about them. He goes, oh, yeah, they came from Quality Marine. And that was all the information he gave to me, which was good, but it would have been really nice to know. Did they come from the Philippines? How were they collected? How were they handled? How am I supposed to feed them later? So I'd like to suggest that we all have the right to know. Not just suggest it, I know. You have the right to know. You're a group of consumers. You're buying a product, and it's very important for you to know every little detail of the animals that you're receiving, because everything that happens to them along the way is going to affect the way they thrive and survive within your habitats. So the information is out there. You have a right to know it. It's available. If it's not available, you need to ask why not. Why can't I find out what's been happening to these animals? It's necessary information. It can actually affect the way you house and handle your animals in the future. It's also useful information because you can apply what you know to what you're going to do in the future. And then lastly, I think the biggest and greatest value that it adds is it gives our animals a story. I don't want to be too touchy-feely, but really every animal that goes on display in our habitats has a huge story. They have a history, they have an interesting story, and I think we should pass that along to our guests because that really does inspire them further. Now, I've been talking about really how a sustainable supply chain ensures success, but what really is a successful animal? And that really is. I think we would all agree that an animal that's thriving is a successful animal, one that is a beautiful animal and fulfills the needs of our habitats. It fits the theme. It's a great display animal, and it inspires our guests to want to conserve and want to know more about them. So it really fulfills a great niche and a great group of needs. But lastly, it also contributes to conservation because we're able to say, yes, this animal came from a sustainable fishery. What does that mean? The fishery is well managed. They're not destroying the ocean just to get this animal. They're not destroying the reef environment just to get this animal onto display. So really, your animal is only a true success if you take that story and use it as a message to your guests. We need to walk the talk. So sustainability as a basic economic model is pretty easy. It has to include everything social, environmental, and economic. And we're all working within this arena. If we forget the social component, we forget the fisherman that's been collecting those animals, we're not getting them enough money to be able to survive and to be able to live. That is a major component that we have to think about in our supply chain management. Obviously, the environment is something that we all want to conserve and that we've all been working hard to give a message to, especially for the ocean environment. And lastly, that economic. Villages, communities, they all need to survive. Fisheries are an important part of our economy. So when you have all of this bundled up together, right in the middle, you have proper sustainability. So just to conclude, I wanted to highlight everything one last time. How a sustainable supply chain ensures success is that you are supporting well-managed fisheries, you're understanding what they are and what the socioeconomic component is. This ensures that the environment is not being damaged during the process of us getting our product. Of course, it reduces stress from excessive handling. You're not passing hand to hand to hand without knowing that each step of the way the animals are being properly cared for. Then, of course, the collection method is an important thing, not just from an environmental perspective, but also for the health and well-being of your animals. And then again, I have to say, it's the story. Our animals are ambassadors for us. They're ambassadors to the world. Only about 20% of the entire world will have the great luck to go swim in a tropical reef and be able to see these animals in the wild environment. Without us displaying them and showing them to the world, they would never be inspired. They would never really care about the ocean. So as aquarists, we're the educators, so we need to show that conservation in action. And that's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, EUAC, and I'd like to give many thanks to the Squire family and to Cairns Marine for allowing me to be here today.
I'm afraid we're short in time. We have very little time for questions now. I suggest that we have a whole series of questions, if Laura don't mind, just after Lai's presentation. Before that, I would like to say that our dear President, Nadia, has a very important address to all of you that's going to be done by the end of this session. So please, everybody, be there by the end of this session, after this presentation, after Lai. Okay, anyway.
We can also invite exhibitors for the surprise.
Yes, I saw that some exhibitors were there. Would you please pass the message and be there by the end of this session? If somebody could pass the message to the exhibitors. Thank you.